The music stopped before anyone even noticed it had faded. Glasses hovered in midair. Conversations broke in half. Every eye in the ballroom turned toward the tall white doors as they slowly opened, and for a long, heavy second, no one moved. A woman stood there alone, framed by golden light from the hallway behind her. A maid. That was what they all thought at first. The maid he had invited as a joke. And yet, nothing about her felt small. Her dress shimmered like midnight water. Deep blue, perfectly cut, flowing to the floor in quiet elegance. Her shoulders were straight. Her chin lifted slightly, not in pride, but in calm certainty. The kind of certainty that makes a room uneasy. Silence spread, thick and uncomfortable, like the air before a storm. People stared, unsure why they were staring, only knowing they could not look away. Across the room, the millionaire felt his fingers tighten around the stem of his glass. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. This wasn't the scene he had imagined. Hours earlier, the moment had seemed funny, harmless, even. That morning, sunlight had poured through the windows of his marble kitchen, reflecting off polished surfaces and expensive appliances that gleamed like trophies. Alana had been on her knees near the island counter, quietly scrubbing a red wine stain someone had spilled the night before. She worked carefully, steadily, as she always did, saying little, moving like a shadow in a house that was never truly hers. He had been standing nearby, scrolling through his phone, half listening to a conversation with a friend about the party he was hosting that night. Investors, executives, celebrities, important people. The kind of gathering where reputations were polished and deals were born over quiet laughter and expensive champagne. Then he looked down at her, and something about the moment amused him. Maybe it was the contrast, the glittering world he lived in and the quiet, invisible one she came from. He smirked. "You should come tonight," he said casually, as if offering a kindness, though his tone carried a thin edge of mockery. "You might learn how real success looks." A few members of the kitchen staff nearby laughed softly, unsure whether they were allowed to laugh. But laughing anyway, that was how it worked in houses like this. You laughed when the powerful laughed. You nodded when they spoke. You stayed invisible. But Alana did not laugh. She simply paused, looked up at him for a brief moment, and nodded once. "Thank you," she said quietly. There had been no anger in her voice, no embarrassment, just calm acceptance, as if his words had not pierced her at all. That unsettled him more than if she had argued. He forgot about the exchange within minutes. For him, it had been nothing, a passing joke, a flicker of amusement in a long day of business calls and schedules. But now, standing in the ballroom hours later, watching her walk slowly across the polished floor, he realized something with a strange, creeping discomfort. She had taken him seriously. Each step she took echoed softly, the sound of her heels steady and measured. The crowd parted without anyone saying a word. Conversations died in whispers. A few people leaned toward each other, murmuring behind raised hands. "Who is she? Isn't that? Wasn't she staff?" The questions floated through the air, but no one spoke loudly enough to claim them. Alana moved through the room with quiet grace, her eyes calm, her expression composed. She was not smiling widely, nor did she look nervous. She looked present, fully present, as if she belonged in her own skin, in a way many people in that room did not belong in their expensive clothes. The millionaire watched her approach, a strange tightness forming in his chest. Something about the way people were looking at her made him uneasy. This was supposed to be amusing, light-hearted, a small joke to remind himself of the distance between his world and everyone else's. But the distance suddenly felt unclear. When she stopped a few steps away, she inclined her head politely. "Good evening," she said. Her voice was calm, steady, warm but controlled. The voice of someone who had learned to carry dignity quietly, without demanding attention. He forced a smile. "You actually came," he said, trying to sound amused, but hearing the faint strain in his own voice. "You invited me," she replied simply. There was a pause, a long one, long enough for the silence around them to grow noticeable again. He gestured vaguely toward the room. "Well, enjoy yourself." She nodded once, then moved past him, her gown brushing softly against the floor, leaving behind a faint scent of something light and floral. And for a moment, he stood there, staring after her, unable to explain why he suddenly felt off balance. Across the ballroom, people were still watching her, not laughing, not whispering cruelly, watching with curiosity, with interest. That was not what he had expected. He moved to the bar and took a slow sip of his drink, tried to shake the feeling that something subtle had shifted in the air, something he could not name, because humiliation, when planned, feels simple, controlled, safe. But sometimes the moment you expect to laugh becomes a moment you begin to feel exposed. As the evening continued, the room slowly filled again with music and conversation, but the energy had changed. People glanced toward Alana again and again, drawn by something they could not quite define. She spoke quietly with a small group near a painting, listening more than talking, her posture relaxed, her presence calm. And each time the millionaire noticed those glances, that strange tightness returned. This wasn't supposed to happen like this. She wasn't supposed to look comfortable here. She wasn't supposed to look like she belonged. Yet somehow she did. And standing there, surrounded by wealth, noise, and glittering light, he felt something unfamiliar creeping into his thoughts. A quiet, uneasy realization. Maybe belonging was not about money. Maybe it was about something deeper, something harder to see. And as he watched her from across the room, laughing softly at something someone said, he felt, for the first time that night, a faint and unsettling thought begin to form. What if the joke wasn't on her? And that thought lingered, quiet and unresolved, as the music swelled and the night moved forward, carrying with it tension no one could yet explain. At first, the whispers were sharp enough to cut. Isn't that his maid? Did he really invite her? How embarrassing. The words floated to the ballroom like perfume, soft, sweet, but toxic underneath. Guests covered their mouths with manicured hands. Eyes followed Alana as if she were something out of place, like a stain on white silk. The music had started again, but the rhythm felt forced, off balance. The millionaire saw it all. He felt the tension. And instead of calming it, he decided to control it. He walked toward her slowly, glass in hand, a polished smile stretched across his face. The kind of smile he used in board meetings. The kind that hid his true thoughts. Well, he said loudly, making sure the circle of nearby guests could hear him clearly, I didn't expect you to actually show up. A few people chuckled. It was light, social, acceptable cruelty. Alana looked at him. Her eyes were steady. Not angry, not hurt, just steady. You said I was welcome, she replied softly. Her voice carried no sarcasm, no shame, only simple truth. For a split second, he felt exposed, but he recovered quickly. He lifted a glass from a passing tray and handed it to her. Careful, he added, lowering his voice just enough to sound playful, but loud enough for others to catch it. These are worth more than your monthly salary. Laughter rippled through the group. It wasn't loud laughter. It was worse. It was polite, controlled. The kind of laughter wealthy people use to protect their image while still enjoying the sting of someone else's humiliation. Alana wrapped her fingers gently around the glass. She didn't look down at it. She didn't look embarrassed. She didn't rush to defend herself. She simply said, Then I'll hold it carefully, and took a slow sip. No tremble in her hand. No crack in her voice. The millionaire felt something shift again. That same strange feeling from earlier. This was supposed to shrink her. Instead, she seemed untouched. He stayed beside her for a moment longer, waiting for discomfort to show on her face, waiting for proof that he still controlled the room. But she stood tall, calm, present, so he excused himself, telling himself he had other guests to greet, important guests, real guests. Yet as he moved through the crowd, shaking hands and exchanging practiced smiles, he noticed something odd. People were glancing past him, looking over his shoulder, looking at her. At first it was subtle. A woman near the bar asked Alana where she found her dress. A man with silver hair leaned in to ask about her accent. The questions were polite but curious. Are you from Paris? The elderly board member asked her gently. Alana smiled. Yes, I lived there for several years. Her accent, once unnoticed in the kitchen, now sounded refined, smooth, elegant. Your French is beautiful, he said. Thank you. she replied. I studied there. The word studied caught attention. Another guest, a well-known philanthropist, stepped closer. What did you study? She asked, tilting her head. International economics. Alana answered. The philanthropist blinked. Really? Yes. There was no boasting, no prideful tone, just fact. The millionaire, standing only a few feet away, felt heat rise under his collar. Economics? He had never heard her mention that. He had never asked. More guests drifted toward her. The gallery owner joined the circle. You were admiring that piece earlier, he said, gesturing toward a large abstract painting on the wall. Not many people understand its meaning. Alana glanced at the artwork thoughtfully. It reflects post-war displacement, she said quietly. The artist used broken lines to show emotional exile. The gallery owner stared at her. That's exactly right. The circle grew wider, and suddenly, the laughter from earlier felt distant, weak. The millionaire watched as conversations formed around her like she had her own gravity. People leaned in when she spoke. They listened. They nodded. They asked more questions. He tried to pull attention back. He raised his voice in another group, telling a story about a recent investment deal. Usually, that would command the room. But tonight, it didn't. Because across the floor, something genuine was happening, and people could feel it. He walked closer again, this time not smiling as easily. He stood just outside the circle, listening. Where did you say you studied? Someone asked. At the University of Paris, she replied. And you're working? I'm working where I'm needed, she said simply. No bitterness. No apology. The philanthropist looked at her with new eyes. You speak Italian too? Yes. Say something. Alana laughed softly, then spoke a short sentence in smooth Italian. The sound of it floated across the room like music. A few guests clapped lightly in surprise. The millionaire felt a strange tightening in his chest again. This wasn't supposed to be happening. She was supposed to feel small tonight, out of place, grateful for the invitation. Instead, she looked comfortable, more than comfortable, confident. And the worst part? She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't performing. She was simply being herself. He realized something painful then. The version of her he knew, the quiet maid who cleaned his floors and wiped his counters, was only a fraction of who she was. He had built an entire image of her based on the uniform she wore. And now that image was cracking. The whispers in the room changed tone. She's impressive. I had no idea. She's brilliant. The laughter had turned into curiosity, then respect. And the millionaire stood there, watching his own joke slip from his control. He stepped forward again, forcing himself into the conversation. Alana has always been full of surprises, he said lightly. She turned toward him, her expression calm. Yes, she said. People usually are. The words were simple, but they landed heavy. People usually are. Not just maids. Not just millionaires. People. He swallowed. For the first time that night, he felt something unfamiliar pressing against his pride. Insecurity. Because the more she spoke, the clearer it became. She was not out of place in this room. She understood finance, art, languages, culture. She carried herself with grace that money couldn't buy. And standing there in his tailored suit, surrounded by everything he owned, he felt something he had not felt in years. Uncertain. The power dynamic was shifting again. Not loudly, not dramatically, but slowly, quietly, like a tide pulling back before a wave. His joke was no longer funny. It was becoming uncomfortable. And deep down, he knew something else was coming. Something bigger than polite laughter and soft applause. Because when you underestimate someone, when you reduce them to a role, when you believe you are above them, the truth has a way of rising. And as he watched another guest approach Alana with admiration in their eyes, he felt a single, unsettling thought settle in his mind. What else didn't he know about the woman? He thought he understood. The answer was coming, and it was going to change everything. The turning point came quietly, almost gently, the way a storm sometimes begins with nothing more than a shift in the wind. The conversations around Alana had already drawn a small crowd, voices soft but curious, eyes warm with interest. Glasses clinked somewhere in the distance. Music played faintly. But in that circle of guests, the world seemed to narrow, as if something unseen was pulling everyone closer. Then a woman stepped forward, her expression changing the moment she saw Alana's face clearly. She was a director of a large foundation, a woman known in the room for her sharp mind and careful judgment. Yet now she looked stunned, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Alana," she said slowly, as if testing the name against a memory. "You're the scholarship recipient from Paris, aren't you?" The air changed. It was subtle, but unmistakable. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. Even those too far away to hear clearly felt the silence spreading like ripples across water. Alana met the woman's gaze and nodded once. "Yes," she said gently. "I studied international economics before my mother became ill. I had to return home." A murmur moved through the crowd, low and restless, like wind through leaves. People exchanged looks. The word economics carried weight in a room like this. It was a language of deals, markets, power. It was not a word anyone expected to hear from a maid who cleaned floors and washed dishes. The millionaire felt his pulse quicken. "Economics," he repeated, the word leaving his mouth before he could stop it. Alana turned slightly toward him, her expression calm, almost kind. "Yes," she said, "I graduated top of my class." There was no pride in her tone, no attempt to impress, just truth, spoken simply. "And cleaning houses," she added quietly, "pays for my mother's treatments." Silence followed those words. A different kind of silence now. Heavier, more human. Somewhere in the room, a woman lowered her glass slowly, her eyes softening. A man shifted uncomfortably, staring at the floor. The laughter from earlier felt like it belonged to another night, another world. The millionaire felt something twist inside his chest. A sharp, unfamiliar discomfort. Not anger, not embarrassment. Something deeper. Regret, perhaps, or the first shadow of it. Before he could gather his thoughts, another voice spoke. One of his largest investors stepped forward, studying Alana with sudden recognition. "Wait," the man said, narrowing his eyes slightly. "You wrote a paper on sustainable microfinance, didn't you? About community lending models in rural regions." Alana looked surprised, but she nodded. "Yes, that was my final thesis." The investor let out a short breath of disbelief. "That paper influenced my firm's expansion strategy 2 years ago. We used parts of your model." A ripple of astonishment moved through the group. The investor turned slowly toward the millionaire. "You never mentioned you had someone like her working for you." The words were not cruel. They were not accusatory. But they struck harder than any insult could have, because the truth was simple. He hadn't mentioned her because he hadn't known. He had never asked, never wondered, never cared enough to see beyond the uniform she wore. And standing there, surrounded by people who were now looking at Alana with admiration, he felt something inside him begin to crumble. The woman he treated as invisible was brilliant. The woman he mocked was accomplished. The woman he invited as a joke was someone others respected, and the realization hit him with quiet force. The joke had never been about her. It had been about his own blindness. He looked at Alana, then really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. Not the maid who arrived early in the morning, not the quiet figure moving through hallways with a cart of supplies, but a person, a whole person, a woman who had crossed oceans, studied in foreign cities, fought for her education, and returned home to care for her family without complaint. How many times had she walked past him, carrying thoughts and memories and dreams he had never even imagined? How many times had he spoken over her, dismissed her, reduced her to a role? The answers pressed against his mind, heavy and uncomfortable. Around them, the mood in the room had shifted completely. Guests no longer whispered behind hands. They listened. They asked questions, not out of curiosity alone, but out of respect. "What was Paris like?" someone asked. Alana smiled softly. "Beautiful," she said, "but lonely at times." "And you gave it up to come back?" "My mother needed me," she replied simply. There was no self-pity in her voice, no drama, just quiet strength, and that strength unsettled the millionaire more than anything else. because it showed him a truth he had spent years avoiding. Character does not come from wealth. Dignity does not come from status. And intelligence does not wear uniforms. He felt smaller with each passing second, not because anyone was trying to make him feel that way, but because the truth itself had weight. And truth, once seen, cannot be unseen. The investor was still shaking his head in amazement. That paper changed the way we approach emerging markets, he said. It made millions possible. Millions. The word echoed in the millionaire's mind, bitter and ironic. All this time, he had measured people by money, and now he stood face to face with someone whose ideas had helped create the very wealth he was so proud of, and he had treated her like she was nothing. A long, quiet moment passed. Then Alana excused herself gently, stepping away from the circle to stand near the balcony doors, where cool night air drifted inside. She looked out over the city lights, her expression thoughtful, peaceful, as if the noise of the room could not touch her. The millionaire watched her from across the floor, feeling the distance between them in a way he never had before. Not the distance of class or status, but the distance between ignorance and understanding. And he realized something that unsettled him deeply. All his life, he had believed power meant control. Control over money, over rooms, over people. But tonight, he was not in control. The room had shifted without his permission. Respect had moved in a direction he could not command. And the woman he thought he had power over needed nothing from him at all. That was the most humbling truth of all. He took a slow breath, staring at her silhouette against the city lights, and a quiet question formed in his mind, heavy and unavoidable. If he had been so wrong about her, what else had he been wrong about his entire life? And as the music played softly behind him and the conversations resumed in low, thoughtful tones, that question lingered unanswered, hanging in the air like the final note of a song that refuses to fade. The party ended nothing like it had begun. Hours earlier, the ballroom had been loud with laughter, full of confidence, full of the careless energy of people who believed they understood the world. Now the music played softly, almost like a whisper, and conversations had slowed. Something real had settled over the room, something heavier than celebration. The millionaire stood near the center of the floor, a glass in his hand that he had not touched in several minutes. He stared down into the golden liquid, watching the reflections tremble slightly with the movement of his fingers. For the first time in years, he felt unsure what to say, unsure of how he appeared to others. It was an unfamiliar feeling, a humbling one. Across the room, Alana stood near the balcony doors, the night air brushing gently through the curtains beside her. She was speaking quietly with an older woman, her posture relaxed, her expression calm. She looked exactly the same as she had earlier in the evening. The only difference was the way people now looked at her. With respect, he took a slow breath, then lifted his head. If he walked away tonight, if he pretended nothing had happened, the truth would still remain. And for the first time in a long time, he did not want to hide from the truth. He set his glass down and stepped forward. Someone noticed a movement, then another. Slowly, conversations faded as people turned to look at him. The room grew quiet again, but this time the silence felt different. Not tense, not curious, expectant. He cleared his throat, his voice lower than usual, stripped of its usual confidence. "May I have your attention for a moment?" he said. The last few whispers faded. He looked around the room, at the faces of investors, colleagues, and friends who had known him for years. People who had seen him as powerful, decisive, certain. And in that moment, he felt none of those things. "I owe someone an apology," he said. A faint ripple moved through the crowd. People glanced at one another, surprised. It was not a sentence they were used to hearing from him. His eyes moved to Alana. All eyes followed. She turned slowly, meeting his gaze, her expression calm but attentive. She did not look nervous. She did not look eager. She simply waited. "I invited her here tonight," he said carefully, "for the wrong reasons." The words felt heavy in his mouth, but once spoken, they seemed to freeze something inside him. "I thought it would be amusing," he continued. "I thought success belonged to people like me, people with money, people with influence. I believed I understood what mattered." He paused, the weight of his own honesty settling over the room. "I was wrong." The silence deepened. not uncomfortable. Real. He turned fully toward Alana now, no longer addressing the room, but speaking to her directly. You deserve more than this job, he said. If you're willing, I would like to help fund your return to the field you belong in, to continue the work you started. It was an offer many would have accepted without hesitation. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her answer. Alana stepped forward slowly, her gown brushing softly against the floor. She stopped a few feet away from him, looking at him not with anger, not with resentment, but with calm strength. For a moment, she said nothing, and in that quiet, something passed between them that words could not carry. An understanding, a recognition. Then she spoke. I don't need saving, she said gently. Her voice was soft, but it carried clearly through the silent room. But I do appreciate respect. The words were simple, yet they struck deeper than any speech. Respect, not charity, not money. Respect. The millionaire felt those words settle into his heart with quiet force. He nodded slowly, understanding that what she had given him in that moment was not rejection, but truth, a truth he had spent years overlooking. I understand, he said quietly, and for the first time that evening, he truly meant those words. No one clapped. No one cheered. The silence that followed was thoughtful, almost reverent, because everyone in that room knew they had witnessed something rare, not a scandal, not a spectacle, something deeper. They had witnessed pride give way to humility. They had witnessed dignity stand taller than wealth. Gradually, the conversations resumed, but the tone of the evening had changed forever. People spoke more softly, listened more carefully, laughed less loudly. It was as if the room itself had learned something. The millionaire stepped onto the balcony a few minutes later, needing air. The city stretched below him, endless lights glowing in the darkness, each one a life, a story, a world he would never fully know. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to see Alana stepping outside as well. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The night breeze carried the distant sound of traffic, the quiet hum of a world that never stopped moving. I meant what I said, he told her finally, not about the money, about being wrong. She looked out at the city lights. Most people never say that, she replied. I should have seen you, he said quietly. Alana smiled faintly. You see me now. And that was enough. They stood in silence for a few seconds more, two people from different worlds, sharing the same quiet understanding. Then she excused herself gently and returned inside, leaving him alone with his thoughts. He stayed there for a long time, looking out over the city, thinking about everything he had built, everything he had believed, and everything he had misunderstood. For years, he had measured people by their titles, their clothes, their bank accounts. He had believed wealth gave him vision, that success made him wise. But tonight had shown him a different truth. Money can open doors, but it cannot open hearts. Money can fill rooms, but it cannot fill a life with meaning. And respect is not something you buy. It is something you give. As the party slowly came to an end and guests began to leave, many of them carried that lesson with them, whether they realized it or not. Because stories like this do not end when the music stops. They live on in the quiet changes people make afterward, in the way they look at others, in the way they choose to see the world. And if there was one truth that remained long after the lights dimmed and the ballroom emptied, it was this. Money can buy invitations, but character earns belonging. And sometimes the person you try to humiliate is the very one sent to humble you.